Plagiarism is Good. It's the best title I've ever come up with for a presentation or a topic or an idea. So Tom and I have been thinking about this for a couple of years now. We've also been talking with one of our colleagues, Flora McMartin, about the idea. And it's a great title. It draws you in, but it really has absolutely nothing to do with actual plagiarism. It's just a great lead-in. One of the things that's possible with open educational resources is this entire notion of reuse, and the license allows you to do certain things. When you license these materials with the various Creative Commons licenses, you can give away the rights or the clarity to do certain things. And so what we're really talking about is getting other people to use these materials and then trying to find out better ways of finding out how they're using the materials. So it's all within the terms of the licenses that are available. So in the last couple of days, I've heard a couple other mentions of things that are very similar to this. So Nathan's talk earlier this morning, and then even during Eric's keynote this morning, talking about different ways of thinking about analytics and not just thinking about web usage logs and how many visits or visitors have come to your pages, but what are they doing with the materials that they're finding in either open educational resources or open courseware. The 30-second preview, Plagiarism is Good. We've been talking about it for about 3 years now. We want to move beyond the idea of access metrics, or how many pages are being seen, to something closer to use metrics. And I get to use a quote that one of my bosses said. VJ said that it's like the McDonald's of use or metrics. It's billions served. So it's just looking at sort of raw numbers, and the bigger the number, the better the number typically. So can we start to think about using something else, thinking of more interesting questions that we might ask, more interesting questions that we might start reporting out on a regular basis instead of just visits and visitors and stuff like that. And it's also fair to mention we're actually still looking for the time to really spend a lot of time working on these ideas. There's a reason we've been thinking about this for 3 years, because we have other things that we've been doing, unfortunately.
Like looking for my dongle. Sorry.
You're going to make it difficult for me to continue, Tom.
Turn this off.
So some of this original thinking comes out of the work that I was doing before I got involved with the Open Educational Resources movement in digital libraries, in educational digital libraries. So starting in about 1995, I've worked with the organizations out of UC Berkeley and then also the Cal State system, building collections. So a lot of you probably have heard of Merlot, but there are a couple other digital collections that were part of that predated Merlot, and then also this thing called the National Science Digital Library, or National Science Distributed Learning as it's now officially titled. But they're collections, and they're mostly references to resources. So it's an index that you can go search through to find materials. And certainly up through mid-2007, when we first kind of did a poster about this, most of the time each of these collections was reporting out accesses and based off usage logs. And it's important to recognize that many of these were just metadata records, unlike some of the things that have been going on in Europe for quite some time now with Ariadne and even some of the Globe partners in the last few years around the world. The content isn't held by the collection. So really all they can do is talk about hits to their website or hits to various metadata records. But for those groups that actually do hold the content, I think you can start to get to a lot more interesting and more detail about how people are using the materials that go beyond web analytics. So a lot of the things going on in 2007, standard usage log analysis, number of visits to the site, number of the visits to a metadata record, maybe clicks on a link. Having run these projects, we actually never reported out clicks on a link, even though that's probably a better measure of use. It's not nearly as large a number, however, as visits to the page. So it's kind of who you're reporting the data for and for what purposes. Then there are some other items up there that we have talked about but don't necessarily really get to use. At the same point in time, OpenCourseWare we're developing and they're doing some very similar things. It's sort of what the web world does at large. Some of the differences at MIT, there are a number of very in-depth surveys where you could start to match up survey data with some of the high-level numbers to get a little bit better picture, but it's not the level of detail that I think we really want to see and really kind of reflect use of, say, MIT OpenCourseWare as opposed to people visiting MIT OpenCourseWare. I'm going to skip this one. What about today? So I posit that it's not that much different today, that a lot of folks are still focused on web usage logs and web analytics. Google Analytics, for example, has made it very easy to do these kinds of things. Perhaps beginning next year, we'll start to see a little bit more about learner analytics or use analytics with what the conference that Eric and David are hosting next February in Banff. Is that right, David?
Banff, Canada. Yeah, the call for papers is still open, but only through the end of the week. So you have 3 days to get your proposal.
Do the organizers have any leeway in that? Ask Eric.
Or me, yes. The answer is yes, but not a lot.
Okay. So Google Analytics and Omniture, which was being used by the NSDL for a while, are easy ways things to implement them across multiple projects to collect data. There's an effort that the Hewlett Foundation has been doing for a year or two now to try and collect combined usage log data through Google Analytics for the various projects that they've been funding. But it's sort of what I'll call a simplistic view of web analysis. It's great to see that there are on the order of 2 million visitors a month to the OpenCourseWare sites. But, okay, so that's a great number, but what are they doing? We know they're getting a lot of traffic, but what's going on? Some sites do rich analysis, but I'm not sure that they share it out on a regular basis. I know that OpenLearn has looked at their downloads and done an analysis on what formats of the downloads have been most popular. Folks like MIT OCW do track downloads, how people are watching videos, but they don't necessarily look at, say, for a 50-minute video, how much of that video is being watched, what portions of that video are being watched. Connections is an interesting platform because they have the ability to do derivative works within the platform. There's been some research published out of Eric's group at KU Leuven and also out of Utah State looking at some of those reuse metrics. Once you start reading through it, you can kind of argue over their methodology, but I think it starts to get some more interesting views of use. Skipping right along. So what are some of the interesting questions that we might ask? And this kind of takes it a different direction than just straight web analytics. So if you've got a lot of these OER and OCW materials available on the web as HTML pages, can we track what's going on when people cut and paste off the page? Are people cutting and pasting off the page? It's a little different to interact with a PDF document where you can look at a download as a proxy for use, but what about cutting and pasting? Remember, we want to see this text being used, being transformed, being modified, being localized. Are there things that we can do to look at what's going on with that? I'm going to skip down. Reading time. So is there a proxy for use that we can look at with reading time? Are there different ways we can consider or scenarios we can consider with users using OCW or OER materials? Are they looking to answer a quick question? Are they looking to really learn the material in depth? Can we start to infer some of that from the time on page and time on task that we can measure that is currently being measured through the web server logs? How about link analysis? So where are links, say, back to MIT OpenCourseWare appearing in either web pages or documents that we can crawl and find on the web? What about looking in Delicious to see how many people are adding various links to their collections or sharing them out through Facebook or Twitter? I'm going to switch it over to Tom. He's got a great story about one way he's been using to track use.
So back about 4 years ago, I decided to take all my Flickr images, all my Flickr photos, and license them CC BY just to see what would happen. So I did, and not really that much happened. I guess I'm just not going to be a famous photographer. But actually, because and the combination of using some decent tagging and taking some interesting little snapshots, actually, I did start to notice little by little. I started to like I say, tag all the pictures from that point on, and I also did something else, which is I set up a Google alert that would scan the web for my Flickr username, which was fairly unique. I had actually used a different username than my other accounts that I have all over the web.
He wanted to be somebody else, I guess.
Having an identity crisis. No, so I'm not sure why I did, but it actually turned out to be kind of useful, because I would get Google alerts telling me, hey, your name has appeared over here. And I would go over there, and sure enough, someone was attributing to me. And so I started kind of an ad hoc collection, I guess. It became kind of a hobby to see where my stuff was being reused. And I was surprised to see that some online, some kind of smaller-sized online news journals and things like that were actually using some of my pictures. One in particular, and Wikimedia and things like that, but one in particular, yeah, go ahead and go. So this is one where, this is actually just outside the high school where I used to teach, and so walking home from lunch, I noticed kind of this interesting perspective with the three signs, all three similar-looking homes were all for sale, right in a row. So I took this picture, and I have gotten more reuse from this single picture, and also because of I tagged it, homes for sale, identical homes, foreclosure. I think I put in as well. Housing bubble was one of the ones that I threw in there, and people writing about this was just about the time in Southern California where the housing crisis was kind of coming to a head. And so as these articles started being written all over the place, I got incredible amounts of reuse. Well, incredible for me, which is like 5. But I mean, and a couple of people that actually contacted me through the Flickr messaging system directly and said, hey, just wanted to let you know we reused your picture in, so-and-so news journal. And so in the comments for each time I found something, either through getting an email or just through the Google alerts, I would actually leave a little link with where I had found that reused. So I actually developed a tag as well, which I just used the tag reused, so that I'm kind of building this little collection, and I also have in the comments, I commented to myself just where these things were being reused. So I had a little bit of fun with it.
Okay, we're starting to run out of time. Scott Leslie mentioned this very briefly yesterday when he was talking during his presentation, but it is his time with the Open University and OLNet. He started a project looking at, can you embed within HTML pages basically a web bug that reports back when somebody downloads the resource and puts it back on the web again, and somebody visits that page. It's an interesting take on, so you get a download use statistic, but also you get a, where else is this resource popping up on the web? How many hits is it getting? What kinds of things are going on? Up behind me, you can see a description from his blog post. And I asked him about it the other day because I was following the work through his blog and asked him, so I never got the end result, so what are you doing next? And it's something that they're going to start to roll out, I think, in the next either a couple weeks or a couple months. He got back from the OU, he took a vacation, and kind of now we're at where we're at. Very briefly, another idea, this actually is based off a commercial product, but the idea of a cut and paste tool. So if I go to a page, select the text, through some JavaScript magic, you can paste it into a page, you can paste it in with a reference back to the original page, you can paste it in with attribution, licensing information if you wanted, but you can also track how that's going on. So both from a provider perspective, what's going on with your the content on your pages, and then also on a continual use perspective. And the original idea and the original reason for Plagiarism is Good is the notion of taking sort of plagiarism detection software that many universities subscribe to and use, where they're looking for people who are plagiarizing to keep them from doing it. We actually want to see it. So what if we started to work with these companies and have them look for our resources and our materials on the web and then report that back to us? I'm going to end there. And do we have time for a question or two? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then we have time for a couple of questions.
She's almost there, Hal.
Thanks. Any thoughts on a sort of a cultural issue around the reuse? Academia has long prized the development of original content. Academics and professors are promoted based on often and get tenure based on publishing, publish or perish. Mm-hmm. How do we move our culture from the notion of publish or perish to what we've been trying to posit as an alternative? We've been talking about organize and thrive,
right,
where we reward people for organizing the best sets of OER in their disciplines and recognize them and grant that the status and recognition that currently only accrues to those who tackle the increasingly difficult task of developing uniquely original material.
I don't necessarily have a great answer for that, but other than the history of sort of academic research has been to build upon the work of others and to properly attribute it and note it in your work, and then it's the academic process is about the creative sort of bringing together of all of that research. I don't know if the challenge is necessarily an OER type challenge, or, as you were saying, sort of a broader challenge that educational work is or should be valued as highly as sort of technical scholarship, if you will. I don't have necessarily a great answer, but it seems that the culture has been to do this anyway. We're trying to promote doing this with respect to educational resources, and so perhaps that starts to work itself out. And if you could start to track the notion has been for the last, 10 years or so, we've talked about providing usage statistics back to faculty authors of these materials. I don't know anybody who's really doing that except for Connections, who makes that kind of available kind of very clearly within their process. Merlot talked about it 8 years ago. My Needs and Smeet projects talked about it 10 years ago, but we just haven't done it yet.
And I would just add that on top of the concept that's already there of building on existing work in academia, I think the idea of reputation is absolutely well. I think this is kind of the new way to build a reputation, and I'm familiar with professors who very quickly have propelled themselves into the top levels of their area, because they've been open about it and they come up first or on the first page of a Google search.